Hey guys, tonight we step into a pair of stiff leather sandals and try to survive a week as a Roman soldier. Though, fair warning, you probably won't survive this. Not because you're weak or anything personal, it's just that the Roman army had a way of turning ordinary people into extremely tired, extremely sweaty machines. Imagine waking up before sunrise to the metallic clink of armor, the smell of campfires, and the quiet realization that someone expects you to march 20 miles today while carrying what feels like a small furniture store on your back. Comforting, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what your local time is. It's always fascinating to see how far these sleepy history journeys travel across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the Roman camp with dust on your sandals and uncertainty in your stomach. The sun hasn't even fully climbed above the hills yet, but the place is already buzzing like a very disciplined beehive. Soldiers move in tidy lines, armor clinks softly, and somewhere nearby, a centurion is shouting instructions in a tone that suggests he has absolutely zero patience for mistakes. You were told the Roman army was organized. What nobody mentioned was that it feels organized down to the last pebble on the ground. Your first impression is the smell. Leather, metal oil, wood smoke, and something vaguely like porridge. It's not unpleasant exactly, just unmistakably practical. Nothing in this camp exists for comfort. Everything exists because it serves a purpose. A soldier nearby sizes you up. He's missing a tooth. His helmet looks like it has been dented several times, and he carries himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who has marched across half the known world. "New recruit?" he asks. You nod. He grins slightly, which is either encouraging or deeply ominous. Historically speaking, most Roman soldiers weren't the towering warriors you might imagine from movies. In fact, a mainstream historical fact is that the average Roman legionary stood around 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 7 inches tall by modern measurements. Not giants, but they were tough, disciplined, and trained relentlessly. The recruitment process itself is surprisingly picky. Roman officials actually preferred healthy young men with strong builds and good teeth, because chewing tough grain rations was basically part of the job description. You're inspected like a horse at a market. Shoulders, legs, posture. Someone even checks your hands to see if they look capable of holding a shield all day. And yes, you'll be holding that shield all day. You're eventually handed a simple tunic and told where to stand. The line of recruits beside you stretches across the courtyard. Some look nervous, others look excited. One guy looks like he just realized he accidentally joined the army instead of the bakery guild. That last one might actually be you. A centurion steps forward. If Roman soldiers were bees, centurions were the very stern beekeepers. These officers commanded about 80 men and were known for being brutally strict. One mainstream fact historians agree on: discipline in the Roman army was legendary. And not the fun kind of legendary. If a soldier disobeyed orders, punishments could range from extra drills to losing pay, or worse. Roman military law included something called decimation, an infamous punishment where 1 out of every 10 soldiers in a unit could be executed if the entire group showed cowardice. Now, before you panic, decimation was rare, but the threat alone kept everyone very motivated. The centurion begins speaking about duty to Rome, loyalty to your comrades, and the glorious honor of serving the empire. It's an inspiring speech, though it also contains a lot of reminders that desertion is extremely illegal. You glance around at your fellow recruits. Some nod seriously. One guy quietly whispers that he thought legion sounded like a dance troupe. He will not be having an easy week. Training begins immediately, which feels a little unfair because you assumed there would be some sort of orientation day. Maybe a welcome scroll, a light snack. Instead, someone hands you a wooden sword. At first, you think this is encouraging. Wooden sounds lighter than metal. Then they hand you the shield. Then you learn the wooden sword is deliberately heavier than a real one. This is a genuine historical detail. Roman training weapons were often made heavier than the real equipment. The idea was simple. If you trained with heavier gear, the real thing would feel easier, which is clever, but currently very uncomfortable. You swing the sword once and immediately realize your arms are about to file a formal complaint. Nearby, veteran soldiers demonstrate drills. Their movements are precise and almost rhythmic. Step forward, shield up, thrust with the sword. Again, again, again. Not slash. Thrust. Roman military manuals emphasized stabbing attacks because they were quicker and more lethal in close formation. You try copying the motion. Your first attempt looks less like a disciplined maneuver and more like you're politely poking an invisible loaf of bread. The instructor notices. He corrects your stance with the calm authority of someone who has repeated the same lesson 10,000 times. Closer, shield higher, short thrust. You repeat it again and again until your shoulders burn. A quirky tidbit about Roman camps begins to become obvious while you train. Soldiers were extremely superstitious. Some carried small charms, others whispered quick prayers before drills. A few believed certain birds flying overhead could predict the outcome of battles. Historians still argue whether these beliefs genuinely influenced military decisions or were simply personal rituals soldiers used to cope with stress. Either way, one recruit beside you refuses to start practice until a raven finishes cawing from the nearby fence. The centurion tells him the raven agrees he should stop delaying and start training. Hours pass. Your arms ache. Your legs ache. You suspect even your eyebrows are tired. But slowly, something interesting happens. The chaos of the morning starts to settle into rhythm. Shield up. Step. Thrust. Step back. Around you, the camp hums with the quiet efficiency of a machine that has been running for centuries. Legionaries repair armor, sharpen blades, cook simple meals, and march in disciplined lines. The Roman army wasn't just a group of fighters, it was an institution, a system refined over generations that allowed Rome to control enormous territories stretching from Britain to the Middle East. Roads, forts, supply chains, all maintained by soldiers, like the slightly exhausted version of you currently standing in the training yard. As the sun climbs higher, sweat drips from your forehead. The instructor finally calls for a pause. You lean on your shield, breathing hard. The veteran soldier from earlier walks past again and gives you an approving nod. Not terrible, he says, which, in Roman soldier language, is apparently the highest form of praise available. Unfortunately, the day isn't even close to finished, because soon you're going to learn something else about life as a Roman soldier. Training was the easy part. Morning comes faster than you expect. In fact, it feels like the sun rose about 10 minutes after you closed your eyes. Somewhere in the camp, a horn sounds, long and low, echoing through the rows of tents like an announcement that sleep is officially cancelled. You sit up slowly, every muscle protesting. Your arms feel like they belong to someone else. Someone who spent yesterday repeatedly stabbing invisible enemies with a wooden sword that weighed roughly as much as a suspiciously large loaf of bread. Around you, the other recruits groan quietly as they wake. Nobody speaks much. There's an unspoken understanding that conserving energy might be wise. The Roman army did not believe in easing people into the day. Within minutes, you're outside, standing in formation with the rest of your training group. The air is cool, the sky pale with early light, and the centurion is already pacing in front of the line with the focused expression of someone preparing to ruin your morning. Training, he announces simply. Not breakfast, not stretching, training. One mainstream historical fact about Roman soldiers is that their training was famously relentless. Roman writers like Vegetius later described drills that lasted hours and were repeated day after day until movements became automatic. The goal wasn't just strength, it was precision and discipline. And today, unfortunately for you, Precision is about to become very important. You're handed the same wooden sword and shield from yesterday. The sword still feels absurdly heavy, as if the carpenter who made it had a personal grudge against new recruits. The instructor demonstrates again. Step forward, shield up, short thrust, step back. The key is coordination. Every soldier in the formation must move at the same time, not early, not late, exactly together. When 80 men advance as one solid wall of shields and blades, it becomes something terrifying. When 80 men advance slightly out of rhythm, it becomes a confused shuffle. Right now, you are definitely part of the shuffle category. The drill begins slowly. Step. You move forward. Thrust. You jab the wooden sword. Back. You retreat. At first it feels manageable, almost relaxing, in a repetitive sort of way. Then the instructor increases the pace. Step. Thrust. Back. Step. Thrust. Back. Step. Thrust. Your shield bumps the soldier beside you. He bumps back. Now the line wobbles slightly like a very tired centipede. The centurion notices immediately. Again, he says calmly. You repeat the drill. And again, and again. Roman military training loved repetition the way bakers love flour. The more you repeat a motion, the deeper it sinks into muscle memory. By the time a real battle arrives, your body should react before your brain has time to panic. Of course, right now your brain is doing plenty of panicking. After what feels like an hour, but is probably only 20 minutes, the drills change. Now you practice marching in formation around the training field. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. Left, right, left, right. Shields bounce slightly with each step. Dust rises from the ground. The sun climbs higher, warming the back of your neck. You start to notice something interesting about the veterans training nearby. Their movements are incredibly efficient. No wasted motion, no unnecessary energy. They march like people who have done this thousands of times, which, in many cases, they probably have. A quirky tidbit about Roman training equipment appears when you pass the edge of the yard. Stuck into the ground are thick wooden posts called palus. These posts were used as practice targets, where soldiers would repeatedly stab and strike as if fighting a real opponent. Each recruit was expected to attack the post again and again, focusing on controlled thrusts rather than wild swings. You approach one of these posts now. The instructor gestures. Imagine it's an enemy. You stare at the wooden pole. It stares back silently. You thrust the sword forward. Thunk. Again. Thunk. Again. Thunk. Soon the entire yard fills with the dull rhythm of wooden blades striking wooden targets. The sound echoes across the camp like a very determined group of carpenters. Somewhere nearby, a recruit mutters that the post is winning the fight. He's not entirely wrong. Historians still argue whether Roman training was intentionally designed to exhaust recruits to their limits, or whether the intensity simply developed naturally over centuries of military tradition. Either way, the result is clear. Only people willing to endure enormous physical effort remained in the ranks. You continue stabbing the post. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Your shoulders burn again, though now the motion begins to feel slightly smoother. Not graceful exactly, but less like you're poking invisible bread. Eventually the instructor signals another change. Now it's time for running. Not casual jogging, full gear running. This is where you learn another famous detail about Roman soldiers. They trained while carrying most of their equipment. The idea was simple. If you could run, march, and fight with heavy gear during practice, you'd be prepared when it truly mattered. So now you run across the field with shield, sword, and helmet bouncing slightly with every step. Dust kicks up behind the group. Your lungs begin negotiating with your legs about stopping. Your legs refuse. The centurion jogs along the edge of the formation like someone who finds this entire situation pleasantly energizing. After several laps, the group slows to a march again. You're breathing heavily now, but something curious is happening. You're still standing, and that feels like an achievement. Nearby, two veteran soldiers watch the recruits with mild amusement. One of them tells a strange story about a legion stationed in Egypt that supposedly kept pet geese in their camp because the birds would loudly warn them if strangers approached at night. It sounds ridiculous, but Roman camps really did rely on all kinds of practical security tricks. The army was full of small traditions like that, little habits and beliefs passed from unit to unit over decades. The afternoon continues with more drills, shield formations, turning maneuvers, coordinated steps. Each movement slowly becomes more familiar. Your arms still ache, your legs still complain, but you're beginning to understand something important. The Roman army wasn't built on individual heroics. It was built on teamwork, every soldier protecting the one beside him, every shield locking into the next. By the time the sun begins sinking toward the horizon, the training yard finally grows quiet. The centurion dismisses the group. You walk slowly back toward the tents, muscles trembling slightly. The veteran soldier from yesterday passes you again and gives a knowing smile. "First real day," he says. You nod. He glances at the shield still hanging from your arm. "Get used to that," he adds. Because tomorrow, you're going to learn just how heavy a Roman soldier's equipment really is, and why marching with it across an empire made even experienced legionaries quietly curse the inventor of armor. By the time the sun rises on your next morning in camp, your body has reached a very honest conclusion. It would like to resign. Unfortunately, the Roman army does not currently offer a resignation form. You wake up slowly, feeling as though every muscle was individually hammered overnight. Around you, other recruits stretch stiffly, the quiet morning air filled with the soft creak of leather belts and the faint metallic clatter of armor being lifted from the ground. Today is equipment inspection day, which sounds harmless. Until you realize that inspection in the Roman army really means carry absolutely everything you're expected to march with. A veteran soldier walks down the line, distributing gear piece by piece. First comes the helmet, the galea. It's heavier than it looks, made of iron with cheek guards that frame your face. When you place it on your head, the world becomes slightly narrower, as if the edges of your vision have politely stepped aside. Next comes the armor. Depending on the era of the Roman army, soldiers wore different types, but one of the most recognizable is the segmented metal armor called lorica segmentata. Bands of iron plates wrap around your torso, fastened with leather straps. When you finally secure it, you immediately notice two things. First, it feels incredibly sturdy. Second, it feels like wearing an entire cooking pot. A mainstream historical fact is that a Roman legionary typically carried around 30 kilograms, about 65 pounds, of equipment during marches. That includes weapons, armor, tools, cooking gear, and personal belongings. In other words, you're about to become a walking storage unit. The shield arrives next. This is the scutum, the large curved Roman shield. It's rectangular with rounded edges and designed to protect most of your body when held properly. In battle formations, these shields could overlap, forming an almost solid wall. Right now, though, it mostly feels like holding a very determined door. You try lifting it with one arm. Your arm considers filing a complaint. Then come the weapons. A short sword called the gladius, designed specifically for thrusting in tight formations, and two heavy throwing spears called pila. The pila are fascinating pieces of engineering. Each has a long iron shank designed to bend when it hits an enemy shield. That way, the spear becomes difficult to remove, forcing the enemy to drop the shield entirely. It's clever, but currently you're wondering why you personally need two of them. The veteran distributing gear seems to read your thoughts. "Because one might miss," he says casually. That explanation does not make the spear lighter. Finally, the last items appear. Tools. Yes, tools. Roman soldiers weren't just fighters, they were builders. So each legionary carried practical equipment like a shovel, pickaxe, or hatchet for constructing camps and fortifications. At this point, your load feels less like military gear and more like the contents of a small hardware store. Someone tightens the straps across your shoulders. The weight settles onto your back. You take one careful step. Your knees briefly consider surrender. A quirky nickname for Roman soldiers begins to make sense now. Other Romans sometimes called them Marius's mules. This nickname supposedly came from the military reforms of the general Gaius Marius, who required soldiers to carry much of their own equipment rather than relying heavily on supply animals. Historians still argue whether the nickname was meant as a compliment for endurance or a sarcastic joke about how overloaded the soldiers were. Right now, it definitely feels like the second option. The centurion orders the recruits into formation. March. And just like that, your first fully equipped march begins. The road outside the camp stretches straight across the countryside like a pale ribbon of stone. Roman roads were famous for their durability, layered carefully with gravel, sand, and stone so they could last for centuries. Some of them still exist today, which is both impressive and slightly intimidating when you realize how many tired soldiers once walked these exact paths. Your boots strike the road. Clomp, clomp, clomp. At first, the weight feels unbearable. The shield presses against your arm, the armor rubs against your shoulders, and the tools on your pack clatter softly with every step. But slowly, something strange happens. Your body adjusts. The rhythm of marching begins to take over. Left foot, right foot, breath steady, shoulders forward. Veterans ahead of you walk with the calm patience of people who know exactly how long the road might be, and that complaining won't shorten it. The landscape rolls gently past. Fields, low hills, scattered farms. Occasionally, a curious farmer stops to watch the column pass. Roman soldiers were a common sight across the empire, but they were still impressive to witness. A long line of armored figures moving together with quiet discipline. Some recruits whisper to each other as they march. One man claims Roman soldiers once trained by swimming across rivers while holding their shields overhead. Another insists that somewhere in the empire there's a legion that fought monkeys. The truth is probably less dramatic, but Roman campaigns did take soldiers into some very unusual environments, from the forests of Germany to the deserts of Syria. The march continues. Dust rises from the road. Sweat trickles down your back beneath the armor. You begin to understand something important. Marching wasn't just transportation. It was a test. Roman commanders believed endurance was one of the most important qualities a soldier could have. Battles might last hours, but campaigns could last years. If you couldn't march long distances with heavy gear, you simply couldn't keep up with the army. And falling behind was not an option. Hours later, the column finally slows. You stop, grateful for the pause. Your shoulders ache, your feet throb, and your shield arm feels slightly numb. The veteran soldier beside you chuckles. "First march?" he asks. You nod. He gestures at the road stretching ahead. "This one's short." Short. The word hangs in the air like a very cruel joke. Because tomorrow, you're going to discover just how far Roman soldiers could really march, and why their road network stretched across an empire that seemed almost impossibly large. The next morning arrives with the quiet certainty that your legs are still attached to your body, though they no longer feel entirely cooperative. You sit up slowly in the tent, stretching carefully, as if sudden movements might cause your muscles to file a formal complaint with the centurion. Outside, the camp is already stirring. Armor clinks softly, horses snort somewhere in the distance, and the familiar smell of wood smoke drifts through the cool morning air. Today, the veterans say, is a real march. Not the short practice from yesterday. A proper one. You step outside and join the formation as the sun lifts above the horizon. The entire column begins organizing itself with almost mechanical precision. Shields are strapped on, helmets adjusted, tools secured to packs. There's a quiet efficiency to it all. No one wastes energy chatting. Everyone knows what's coming. A mainstream historical fact about the Roman army is that a typical marching day could cover around 20 Roman miles, roughly 18 to 20 modern miles, depending on the conditions. That's about 30 kilometers. And that distance was often covered while carrying the same equipment currently hanging from your shoulders, like a determined backpack made of metal and wood. The centurion gives the signal. The column begins to move. Thousands of sandals strike the road in steady rhythm. Clomp, clomp, clomp. Roman roads stretch ahead like a carefully carved path through the countryside. They're famously straight, sometimes cutting across hills rather than bending around them. Roman engineers preferred direct routes whenever possible, which is wonderful for travel efficiency, slightly less wonderful for your calves. You march between two veteran soldiers who seem almost suspiciously calm about the situation. One of them whistles quietly, the tune drifting lazily into the morning air. You wonder if he's doing it to stay relaxed, or to distract himself from the weight of his gear. The road carries the column past farmland and small villages. Farmers pause in their work to watch the legion pass by. Children wave. Dogs bark loudly at the strange parade of shields and helmets. For many people across the empire, Roman soldiers were both reassuring and intimidating. They meant protection, but they also meant taxes, rules, and the undeniable presence of imperial authority. The march continues. After an hour, your shoulders start to ache again. After 2 hours, your feet begin negotiating with gravity. After 3 hours, you stop noticing individual discomforts and instead experience a general sensation best described as tired everywhere. The veterans call this the marching trance. Left foot, right foot, breath steady, eyes forward. Eventually your mind drifts, carried along by the rhythm of movement. A quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers appears when one of the veterans starts talking about lucky marching rituals. Some soldiers insisted on stepping onto the road with their right foot first, believing it would bring good fortune for the journey. Others carried small charms, tiny carved animals, pieces of bone, or miniature figurines of Roman gods. Historians still argue whether these personal superstitions were officially tolerated or quietly ignored by commanders who understood that soldiers needed small comforts during long campaigns. Either way, the legion you're marching with seems to have plenty of them. The soldier behind you mutters a short prayer every time the road passes a crossroads. The one ahead taps his shield 3 times before every rest break, and you mostly hope your legs keep functioning. Around midday, the column finally halts. The pause feels miraculous. You lower your pack slightly and roll your shoulders, trying to convince your muscles they're not permanently frozen. Some soldiers sit immediately, others remain standing, conserving energy. Food appears from packs, simple rations that can be eaten quickly during short breaks. Hard bread, cheese, maybe dried fruit if someone was lucky. Roman soldiers often carried grain with them and prepared meals when time allowed. But during marches, food needed to be quick and portable. You chew slowly, staring out across the countryside. It's surprisingly peaceful. The distant hills glow softly under the afternoon sun. A breeze moves through the tall grass beside the road. For a moment, if you ignore the armor and the aching legs, and the fact that you're part of a massive military machine, it almost feels like a quiet countryside walk. Then the horn sounds again. Break over. The column rises and continues forward. Roman roads were one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. Stretching more than 250,000 miles across the empire, they connected cities, forts, and trade routes with astonishing efficiency. The famous phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't entirely metaphorical. Many of them really did. Of course, someone had to walk those roads. That someone is currently you. The afternoon march feels longer than the morning. The sun grows warmer, the dust thicker. Shields rub against arms, armor creaks with every step. Yet the legion keeps moving with steady discipline. That's the secret of Roman military success. Not speed, not individual heroics. Consistency, step after step, mile after mile, empire after empire. As the sun finally begins sinking toward the horizon, the centurion raises a hand. The column slows, You've marched almost 20 miles. Your legs feel like boiled noodles, but strangely, you're still upright. The soldiers begin turning off the road into a flat stretch of open land. At first, you assume this means rest, sleep, maybe a very long nap. But the veterans are already unstrapping tools from their packs: shovels, pickaxes, hatchets. You blink slowly, because now you're about to learn something that surprises almost every new recruit. Even after marching all day, Roman soldiers still had to build an entire fortified camp before they were allowed to sleep. You stand in the fading light of evening, legs trembling slightly after the long march, staring out across an empty patch of land that looks very much like an empty patch of land. No tents, no walls, no camp. Just grass, dirt, and a few scattered rocks. You glance at the veterans around you, expecting someone to announce that this is a temporary stop before reaching the real camp. Instead, soldiers begin calmly dropping their packs. Then they start digging. It dawns on you slowly, like the unpleasant realization that a long day is not actually finished. This is the campsite, and you are going to build it. One of the most impressive mainstream facts about the Roman army is that legionaries constructed a fortified camp almost every single night while on campaign. No matter where they were, Spain, Gaul, Britain, the Middle East, the routine was nearly identical. March all day, build a fortress, sleep, repeat tomorrow. The centurion begins assigning tasks with brisk efficiency. Some soldiers mark the perimeter of the camp using measuring rods. Others unload wooden stakes called pila muralia from their packs. These stakes will form the defensive wall. You, unfortunately, are handed a shovel. The ground in front of you is marked with a line. Trench, the instructor says. You stare at the dirt. The dirt stares back with quiet confidence. Soon the entire legion is working. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of soldiers move across the field, like an organized swarm of ants. Shovels strike earth. Clods of dirt thump into growing piles. Pickaxes chip stubborn stones. Roman camps weren't random clusters of tents. They followed a strict grid layout that had been refined over centuries. The streets ran in straight lines. Command tents sat at the center. Each unit had a precise location. In fact, Roman camps were so consistent that a soldier could wake up in a completely different province and still know exactly where everything would be. Historians still debate whether this rigid layout was purely practical or also designed to reinforce discipline and order within the army. Either way, it meant that even in the middle of nowhere, the Roman army created a tiny temporary city every evening. Your trench slowly grows deeper. Dirt piles beside you. Sweat drips from your forehead despite the cooling air. The trench will eventually run all the way around the camp, forming a defensive ditch. Behind it, soldiers will raise a rampart of packed earth and wooden stakes. It's not just busy work. These fortifications could stop surprise attacks and buy precious time if enemies appeared during the night. A veteran working beside you glances at your shovel technique. You're digging like you're apologizing to the dirt, he says. He demonstrates a faster motion, shorter strokes, steady rhythm. You copy it. The work becomes slightly easier. Around you, the camp begins taking shape. The trench grows deeper. Wooden stakes form a jagged defensive wall. Inside the perimeter, soldiers mark out neat rows where tents will stand. A quirky tidbit about Roman camps emerges when someone mentions the army's obsession with straight lines. Roman officers were so strict about alignment that soldiers sometimes used ropes and measuring rods to ensure the streets ran perfectly parallel, even after marching 20 miles. Apparently, crooked streets were unacceptable. You pause for a moment, leaning on the shovel. The sky above has shifted from gold to deep blue. The first stars are beginning to appear. It's strangely peaceful. The rhythmic sound of digging fills the air, mixed with quiet conversation and the occasional joke. One soldier claims that some Roman camps became so well built that local villagers later reused the foundations for permanent towns. Another swears that somewhere in Gaul there's a hill made entirely from centuries of discarded Roman trenches. The truth might be somewhere in between. What's clear is that the Roman army built thousands of camps during its long history. Temporary fortresses that appeared overnight and disappeared again the next morning. Finally, after what feels like another full day of labor, the trench is finished. The wall stands complete. Tents rise quickly inside the camp as soldiers unpack supplies. Your own tent is simple, leather stretched over wooden poles, shared with several other soldiers. It's not luxurious, but right now it looks like the most comfortable place in the empire. A cooking fire flickers nearby. The smell of warm grain porridge drifts through the camp. Roman soldiers often cooked simple meals at the end of the day, using grain rations they carried with them. Bread, porridge, and soup were common staples. Nothing fancy. But after marching and digging all evening, it smells incredible. You sit on the ground beside the fire, helmet resting at your feet. Your arms are sore. Your back aches. Your hands are dusty from digging. Yet the camp around you feels strangely secure. Torches glow along the rampart. Guards take positions at the gates. Inside the walls, hundreds of soldiers settle into quiet routines, eating, repairing gear, murmuring softly as the long day fades into night. The veteran beside you stretches his legs and sighs. "Not bad," he says. You stare at him. "Not bad. You marched 20 miles, dug a trench, built a wall, and it's apparently considered a fairly normal Tuesday." You finish your meal slowly, listening to the quiet hum of the camp. Somewhere a soldier hums a soft song. Another sharpens a blade with steady strokes. Gradually, the fires burn lower, the sky darkens, and sleep finally begins to creep closer. But tomorrow will bring another challenge of Roman soldier life. Because surviving in the legion wasn't just about marching and building. It was also about eating whatever the army gave you and learning to enjoy it, even when the menu was, let's say, extremely practical. Morning in the Roman camp arrives quietly, though not gently. The first sounds you notice are the soft crackle of dying embers and the distant murmur of soldiers already awake. Someone nearby coughs. Another soldier stretches, armor creaking softly as he sits up. You open your eyes slowly and realize two things immediately. First, the ground is surprisingly comfortable when you're exhausted enough. Second, breakfast smells interesting. You crawl out of the tent into the cool early air. The fortified camp you helped build last night now looks almost peaceful in the pale light of dawn. Rows of tents sit neatly along straight dirt streets. Guards still stand along the rampart, silhouettes against the brightening sky. And in several places around the camp, small cooking fires are already burning. Roman soldiers usually prepared their own meals in small groups called contubernia, a squad of about 8 men who shared a tent and basic cooking equipment. In many ways, this group functioned like a tiny household within the massive army. Which means breakfast depends partly on the cooking skills of the men in your tent. You glance at them. One looks competent. One looks half asleep. One looks like he might accidentally invent a new form of charcoal. The veteran soldier from yesterday crouches near the fire stirring a pot. Inside is a thick mixture of grain and water, slowly bubbling into something resembling porridge. A mainstream historical fact about Roman soldiers is that their main food staple was wheat. Soldiers typically received grain rations that they had to grind themselves into flour before cooking it into bread or porridge. It wasn't glamorous, but it was reliable. The Roman army's logistical system was remarkably efficient for the ancient world. Supplying thousands of soldiers across distant provinces required careful planning, supply convoys, storage depots, and a network of roads that allowed food to travel long distances. Without that system, the empire simply couldn't have functioned. The veteran hands you a wooden bowl filled with the steaming grain mixture. You take a cautious bite. It's not bad. Plain, certainly, but warm. After yesterday's march and trench digging, your body accepts the food like a long-lost friend. Some soldiers sprinkle a little salt into their bowls. Others add bits of cheese or dried herbs if they have them. Occasionally, the army distributed meat rations, especially pork or bacon, but those were less common than grain. A quirky tidbit about Roman military life comes up when one soldier pulls a small pouch from his pack and adds crushed garlic to his food. Garlic, it turns out, was extremely popular among Roman soldiers. Many believed it improved strength and stamina. Some even thought it protected against illness. Historians still argue whether garlic truly had noticeable health benefits for soldiers, or whether its reputation was simply a cultural belief that spread through the ranks. Either way, the smell is very powerful. Within minutes, the entire tent group smells like an enthusiastic Italian kitchen. Breakfast continues quietly. Soldiers eat, sip water, and stretch tired legs. The mood is calmer than during training or marching. Morning meals in camp often felt like the most peaceful part of the day. Of course, not every meal was this pleasant. Roman soldiers sometimes had to rely on whatever supplies were available during campaigns. If supply lines failed, or the army marched through poor territory, food could become very basic very quickly. There are records of soldiers surviving on barley instead of wheat, a grain considered lower quality at the time. Being issued barley rations was sometimes used as a punishment for poorly performing units. Imagine working incredibly hard for weeks and then discovering your reward is inferior porridge. Morale probably dipped slightly. Nearby, one soldier starts telling a story while he chews. He claims that during a campaign in the eastern provinces, his unit once ate roasted locusts after a swarm passed through their camp. Another soldier insists that in Britain, Roman troops occasionally tried local foods like oysters and strange fermented fish sauces. That last one might not be a rumor. Romans were extremely fond of garum, a fermented fish sauce used as seasoning in many dishes. To modern ears, it might sound questionable, but to Romans, it was a beloved flavor enhancer. You imagine pouring fish sauce into your morning porridge and decide perhaps some traditions are best left in the past. After breakfast, the contubernium begins cleaning up. Bowls are rinsed, fires are extinguished, gear is packed neatly. Discipline extended even to meals. A messy camp could attract pests or waste precious food supplies. The veteran wipes his hands and glances toward the camp gate. "Better eat well," he says. You nod slowly, because one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Roman soldier life runs on a constant cycle. March, build, eat, train, repeat. There's always another task waiting just beyond the horizon. As the sun climbs higher, horns sound across the camp, signaling the start of the day's duties. Some soldiers begin repairing equipment. Others sharpen blades or check armor straps. And a group of recruits, including you, are summoned to the training field again. Your arms immediately remember yesterday. But before training begins, the centurion gathers the group for inspection. He walks slowly down the line, examining armor, shields, and weapons, with the sharp eye of someone who has seen every possible mistake. Roman military discipline wasn't just strict. It was constant. Every strap mattered. Every blade had to be sharp. Every soldier had to be ready. Because somewhere out beyond the hills and forests and roads of the empire, there were always potential enemies watching. And eventually, every soldier in the legion would face the moment when training stopped being practice, when the shields locked together for real, when the gladius left its scabbard for more than drills, when the quiet routines of camp life suddenly turned into the thunder of battle. For now, though, the centurion simply nods and gestures toward the training yard, which means breakfast is over, and the next lesson in surviving the Roman army is about to begin. The lesson of discipline, and why Roman soldiers feared their own officers almost as much as they feared the enemy. The training yard is already alive with movement when you arrive. Soldiers cross the packed dirt in every direction, some practicing shield drills, others repairing equipment, and a few unlucky recruits carrying buckets of water back and forth for reasons that are probably related to punishment. You quickly realize something important about Roman camps. There is always someone being corrected, sometimes loudly. The centurion stands at the center of the yard like the calm eye of a storm. His armor gleams slightly in the morning sun, and his vinewood staff, called a vitis, rests casually in his hand. That staff is not decorative. A mainstream historical fact about the Roman army is that centurions had the authority to discipline soldiers directly, sometimes using the vites to strike men who failed drills, disobeyed orders, or disrupted formation. Roman discipline was famously strict, and today you're about to see exactly why. The recruits form a line while the centurion walks slowly in front of you, inspecting everything: helmet straps, armor buckles, sword positions. When he stops in front of one recruit, he reaches forward and tugs on the man's shield strap. It comes loose immediately. The centurion stares at it for a moment. Then he raises an eyebrow. The recruit looks like he has just realized he left the stove on at home, if home were several provinces away, and the stove were a Roman officer with a disciplinary stick. The centurion taps the loose strap once with the vites, not hard, just enough to make the point. "Equipment fails," he says calmly. "You fail." The recruit nods rapidly and fixes the strap. The inspection continues. Roman military discipline was built on a simple idea. The army functioned as one machine. If a single soldier made a mistake, dropped his shield, broke formation, forgot equipment, the entire unit could be endangered. So small errors were corrected immediately, and sometimes memorably. Historians still argue whether Roman punishments were as brutal as some ancient writers claimed, or whether those stories were exaggerated to emphasize discipline. What's clear is that the Roman army took order extremely seriously. The inspection ends with a sharp nod. "Formation drills," the centurion announces. You move into position with the other recruits. The shields rise. The instructor begins calling commands. "Forward, step, thrust." The gladius drives forward. "Shield." You snap the shield upward. This time the movements feel slightly smoother than they did a few days ago. Your body remembers the rhythm, even if your muscles still complain about it. Nearby, a group of veteran soldiers practices a more advanced maneuver. They raise their shields overhead, locking them together in a layered formation. You watch curiously. One of the older soldiers notices and grins. "Testudo," he says. The testudo, or tortoise formation, was one of the Roman army's most famous defensive tactics. Soldiers locked shields on all sides and above their heads, creating a protective shell against arrows and projectiles. From a distance, the formation really did resemble a giant armored turtle slowly moving across the battlefield. Of course, performing it correctly required perfect coordination and plenty of practice. You attempt a simplified version with the recruits. Shields rise, edges touch. Suddenly, the world becomes darker beneath the overlapping wood and iron. Someone accidentally bumps the shield above you, causing a ripple of movement through the formation. "Hold steady," the instructor snaps. You tighten your grip. For a moment, the entire group stands locked together, breathing slowly beneath the shield canopy. It's strangely quiet inside, almost peaceful, until someone's arm gets tired. Then the shields wobble slightly. The instructor sighs. Again. Nearby, a veteran tells a curious story about discipline in the Roman ranks. He mentions something called decimation, a punishment used in extreme cases where 1 out of every 10 soldiers in a disgraced unit was selected by lot and executed by the others. You blink slowly. That sounds unpleasant. The veteran shrugs. It was rare, he says, and historians generally agree with that. Decimation was used only in severe situations, usually when units mutinied or fled from battle. Still, the mere possibility probably encouraged soldiers to take discipline seriously. Very seriously. The drills continue through the morning. Shield walls, formation turns, coordinated advances. Your arms ache again, but the movements gradually become more natural. The gladius thrust feels smoother now, short, controlled, efficient. Roman combat relied heavily on stabbing rather than slashing. A quick thrust from behind the shield could be surprisingly effective in tight formations. By midday, the training slows. The centurion dismisses the recruits for a short break. You sit beneath a tree near the edge of the yard, stretching your tired arms. A group of veterans nearby plays a quiet dice game on a flat stone. Gambling was technically restricted in Roman camps, but like many rules in human history, enforcement could be flexible when officers weren't watching closely. Coins clink softly. Someone laughs. Another soldier complains that the dice are cursed. A quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers is that many carried small personal items, dice, charms, carved figurines, even letters from home. Archaeologists have discovered these objects in ancient military camps across Europe and the Middle East. Little reminders that behind the armor and discipline were ordinary people trying to survive long years far from home. You watch the dice game for a moment. Then the horn sounds again. Break over. The centurion returns to the yard, his calm expression unchanged. Back to formation, he calls. The soldiers rise, shields lift. Because discipline in the Roman army wasn't something practiced once in a while. It was constant. Day after day, drill after drill. Until eventually the moment would come when the formations weren't practice anymore, when the shields locked together for real, and the enemy stood waiting just across the field. The afternoon settles over the camp with a quieter rhythm than the morning drills. The training yard empties, armor is loosened slightly, and soldiers begin drifting back toward their tents or small fires. For the first time since arriving, you notice something interesting. When the shouting stops, the Roman army feels surprisingly human. Men laugh. Someone sings badly. A group near the cookfire argues passionately about which province produces the best wine. Life inside the legion, it turns out, isn't constant marching and discipline. Between campaigns and training, soldiers spent long hours simply living together. And when you place thousands of people in the same place for years at a time, they form their own strange little world. You sit with your contubernium near the tent, polishing your shield, while the veteran from earlier sharpens his gladius with slow, steady strokes. First week's the worst, he says casually. You glance up. How long have you been here? You ask. 10 years. 10. You blink. Roman soldiers typically served around 20 years, sometimes longer depending on the era. That's a mainstream historical fact that surprises many people today. Joining the Legion wasn't a short contract. It was basically half your adult life. The veteran notices your expression and chuckles. Don't worry, he says. After the first few years, it all feels normal. You're not sure whether that's comforting or alarming. Nearby, two soldiers begin a quiet game of tally, a Roman dice game played with knucklebones. They toss the pieces onto a flat board, arguing about the results, while small bronze coins change hands. Technically, gambling inside the camp wasn't encouraged. Practically speaking, soldiers found ways. Another group passes around a battered wooden cup filled with watered wine. The drink isn't strong, but it's enough to loosen conversation after a long day of marching and training. You take a sip. It tastes questionable. Romans often diluted wine with water, believing drinking it straight was barbaric. Whether that made it taste better is still open for debate. Historians still argue whether the diluted wine in military camps was primarily for health reasons, since wine could kill bacteria in water, or simply a cultural habit Romans carried everywhere. Either way, it's the closest thing the camp has to a relaxing evening drink. The conversation drifts across topics. Campaign rumors, cities soldiers have seen, strange animals from distant provinces. One veteran claims he once saw a camel spit directly into a centurion's helmet somewhere in Syria. Another swears that in northern forests, barbarians paint their bodies blue before battle. That last one actually has some historical truth. Certain Celtic tribes reportedly used plant-based dyes like woad to colour their skin. Whether it looked impressive or simply messy is still debated. As the sun lowers toward the horizon, the camp fills with softer sounds. Cooking fires crackle, armour is repaired, boots are cleaned. A quirky detail about Roman military life appears when one soldier pulls out a small wooden carving of a dog. He places it beside his bowl while he eats. Good luck charm, he explains. Many Roman soldiers carried tiny figurines or amulets representing gods, animals, or protective spirits. Archaeologists have uncovered these objects across former Roman military sites. Some soldiers prayed to Mars, the god of war. Others preferred Fortuna, the goddess of luck. And some probably figured it didn't hurt to ask every god available. You lean back slightly and watch the sky darken. The stars begin appearing above the camp walls. Despite everything, the training, the marching, the strict discipline, there's a strange comfort in the routine forming around you. Everyone here understands the same rules. Everyone marches the same roads. Everyone eats the same grain porridge. The legion becomes a kind of brotherhood. Soldiers depend on one another constantly. In battle, the man beside you protects your flank. During marches, he helps carry supplies. In camp, he shares food and stories. It's a bond built through hardship. And boredom. Lots of boredom. Because another truth about Roman soldier life is that long stretches of time passed without major battles. Armies might spend months or even years stationed in forts, patrolling borders or waiting for orders. During those quiet periods, soldiers filled time however they could. Games, training, writing letters, or simply telling the same stories again and again. A soldier across the fire begins humming a marching song. The melody is slow and steady, matching the rhythm of footsteps on a long road. Others join softly, not loudly, just enough to keep the tune alive. The sound drifts through the evening air. Beyond the camp walls, the countryside is quiet. Somewhere far away, an owl calls from the trees. For a moment, the Roman army feels less like a war machine and more like a traveling town of tired people sharing the same strange life. But tomorrow could change that, because sooner or later, every legion encounters something that breaks the calm routine. A messenger arriving with urgent orders, a scout reporting enemy movement, or the distant glint of shields across an open field. The moment when the training yard drills suddenly become very real. And when that moment comes, you'll learn why Roman battle formations were feared across the ancient world. Because facing the enemy in a Roman line was very different from practicing in a quiet camp. The morning begins like most others in the camp. A horn sounds somewhere near the command tent. Soldiers stir from sleep. Fires are lit. Armor is adjusted in the pale early light. The quiet routines of camp life begin again. You're halfway through a bowl of grain porridge when the mood shifts. It's subtle at first. A messenger rides through the gate at speed. Horses usually move calmly inside a Roman camp, but this one is breathing hard, its hooves striking the dirt with urgency. The rider disappears toward the command tent, where several officers are already gathering. No one says anything out loud, but soldiers notice. The quiet conversations around the fires fade slightly. Veterans glance toward the center of camp with the casual alertness of people who have seen this moment before. You finish your meal slowly, because something in the air has changed. Not panic, just attention. About an hour later, the horn sounds again. 3 sharp blasts that carry across the entire camp. Assembly. Soldiers grab helmets and shields. Lines begin forming quickly in the central field. Roman armies were famous for their ability to organize rapidly. Training and discipline meant that thousands of men could assemble into formation within minutes. You take your place in the line, shield resting against your leg. The centurion walks past, his expression calm but focused. Soon, a scout steps forward near the officers. You can't hear every word from this distance, but a few phrases drift across the field. Movement in the hills, a small enemy force, possibly raiders. The officers exchange quiet remarks. This isn't a massive battle, more likely a patrol or minor skirmish. Still, the atmosphere shifts again. The Centurion turns toward your formation. "Gear ready," he says simply. You tighten the strap on your shield. This is the moment when training starts feeling a little less theoretical. A mainstream historical fact about Roman warfare is that legionaries usually fought in organized formations designed to maintain stability and coordination. Unlike many ancient armies that relied heavily on individual heroics, Roman tactics emphasized discipline and teamwork. Each soldier had a specific role within the formation, and breaking formation was one of the worst mistakes a soldier could make. Soon the gates open, the patrol moves out. You march through the countryside again, though this time the atmosphere feels different from the long road marches. The shields remain ready, helmets stay secured, eyes scan the hills. Roman scouts move ahead quietly, checking the terrain. The column eventually slows near a low ridge overlooking a stretch of grassland. Officers gather briefly, while soldiers spread into a defensive line. You can see movement across the field now, a small group of warriors on the far side, lightly armed, watching cautiously. No one charges immediately. Ancient battles often began with careful positioning and testing, rather than instant chaos. The Centurion gives a quiet command. Shields rise. The line forms. Your heart beats slightly faster as you lock your shield beside the soldiers next to you. The familiar curve of the scutum presses against your arm. For a moment, the entire line stands still. Wind moves softly across the grass. The opposing group shifts uncertainly. Roman formations could look intimidating, even before combat began. A wall of overlapping shields and metal helmets, perfectly aligned. A quirky detail about Roman warfare appears when one veteran beside you quietly spits into the dirt before battle. "Luck," he mutters. Many soldiers across ancient cultures practiced small superstitious rituals before fighting, touching charms, saying brief prayers, or repeating lucky phrases. Historians still argue whether these habits had psychological benefits for soldiers, or were simply comforting traditions carried from civilian life. Either way, the man beside you seems satisfied with his luck-spitting technique. Across the field, a few projectiles suddenly arc through the air. Light javelins. They land short of the Roman line. Testing distance, the Centurion responds with a calm command. "Pila ready." You grip the heavy throwing spear. The iron shank glints briefly in the sunlight. Throw. The Roman line releases the pila almost simultaneously. The spears arc high before crashing toward the opposing group. Even from this distance you can see the sudden disruption. A few shields are struck. One of the long iron shafts bends on impact, exactly as designed, making the shield awkward to carry. The enemy group hesitates. They clearly hadn't expected such a coordinated response. Another command follows. Advance. The Roman line begins moving forward. Slow, steady, shields locked. The grass brushes against your sandals as the formation closes the distance. The opposing group quickly realizes something important. They are outnumbered and facing a formation that looks like a moving wall. Within moments, they begin retreating back toward the hills. The Roman line halts. The Centurion watches calmly as the figures disappear into the distance. No pursuit, no dramatic clash of swords. Sometimes the most effective show of force is simply demonstrating discipline. The shields lower. The patrol relaxes slightly. One veteran beside you shrugs. "Could have been worse," he says. You nod. Your heart is still beating a little faster. Even a small encounter like that reminds you of something essential about the Roman army. Its real strength wasn't wild bravery or reckless attacks. It was order, coordination, thousands of soldiers trained to move like parts of the same machine. And that machine had marched across continents. As the patrol turns back toward camp, the tension slowly fades. But one thing becomes clear. Sooner or later, you'll face a battle that doesn't end with the enemy quietly retreating. And when that day comes, surviving the Roman army will depend on more than just marching and discipline. It will depend on courage and perhaps a little luck. By the time you return to camp, the afternoon sun hangs warm and steady above the rampart. The patrol files through the gate in the same orderly rhythm it left with, shields resting against tired arms, sandals scraping softly against the packed dirt. Nothing dramatic happened out there. No heroic charges, no legendary duel, just a brief standoff and a retreating enemy group disappearing into the hills. Yet the experience leaves a quiet weight in your thoughts, because now you know something important. The drills in the training yard aren't just exercises. They're preparation for moments like that. Inside the camp, soldiers resume their routines almost immediately. Some return to equipment maintenance. Others start preparing the evening meal. A few guards climb the rampart to resume their watch. Life in the Roman army moves forward without much pause. You sit beside the tent and remove your helmet, rubbing your neck where the metal rim has been pressing all day. The veteran from your contubernium drops down nearby with a small grunt of relief. "First patrol?" he asks. You nod. "Not too bad," he says. "Better when they run." You suspect he's right. A mainstream historical fact about Roman military success is that the army relied heavily on routine patrols and reconnaissance. Legions rarely marched blindly into unknown territory. Scouts, patrols, and auxiliary cavalry constantly gathered information about nearby terrain and enemy movements. That steady flow of information helped Roman commanders avoid surprises whenever possible. Of course, ancient intelligence gathering wasn't perfect. Sometimes scouts missed things, sometimes enemies hid well, and sometimes entire battles erupted unexpectedly. Historians still argue whether Roman victories came more from superior tactics or from the empire's vast logistical and organizational advantages. In truth, it was probably a mix of both. You lean back against a wooden crate and watch the camp settle into its evening rhythm again. Cooking fires flicker to life. Someone begins roasting strips of salted pork over a small flame. The smell drifts across the tents, making your stomach suddenly realize it's been a long day. Roman soldiers often received occasional meat rations alongside their grain. Pork was particularly common, usually salted or smoked so it could survive long supply journeys. You're handed a small portion along with the usual bread and porridge. It tastes fantastic. After hours of marching and standing in armor, almost anything warm and salty feels like a feast. Nearby, a group of soldiers begins discussing past campaigns. One mentions fighting in the deserts of the eastern provinces. Another claims he once spent 3 months stationed near the Rhine River, watching dense forests, where enemies could appear without warning. A quirky tidbit surfaces when someone mentions that Roman soldiers sometimes encountered animals they had never seen before during campaigns. In Northern Europe, for example, Roman troops wrote about encountering enormous wild cattle called aurochs, creatures so large and aggressive that even experienced soldiers treated them cautiously. Imagine being trained for battle, and then discovering the local wildlife might also try to charge you. The stories drift through the warm evening air. Some are probably exaggerated. Others might be surprisingly accurate. That's the nature of soldier storytelling. You notice something interesting about these veterans. They talk about battles casually, not dramatically, not with heroic speeches, just as events that happened during long years of service, like storms during a long voyage. Inevitable, sometimes dangerous, but part of the journey. The sun slowly dips toward the horizon. Shadows stretch across the camp streets. The guards along the rampart shift positions as evening approaches. Roman camps operated on a strict watch schedule during the night. Soldiers took turns guarding the gates and walls, ensuring that the camp remained secure while most of the legion slept. Night duty was rarely popular, but everyone eventually took their turn. A soldier nearby checks a small wax tablet where watch assignments are recorded. He groans quietly when he sees his name listed for the second night watch. That means waking up in the middle of the night. You silently hope your turn isn't tonight. As darkness settles over the camp, torches appear along the main street leading to the command tent. Their warm light flickers against shields stacked neatly outside tents. The atmosphere becomes calmer again. Soft conversations, low laughter, the occasional clatter of cooking pots. It's almost peaceful. But you've begun noticing something else about Roman soldier life. Even during quiet evenings, there's always preparation happening somewhere. A group of soldiers sharpens pillar points near the armory tent. Another repairs leather straps on several shields. And near the gate, 2 officers quietly study a map spread across a wooden table. The empire is vast. Its borders stretch across mountains, deserts, forests, and rivers. Somewhere along those borders, another legion is probably marching tonight. Another camp is being built. Another patrol is moving cautiously through unfamiliar land. The Roman army never truly stops. Eventually the fires burn lower. The stars appear overhead once again. And the camp grows quieter as soldiers retreat into their tents. You lie down on the simple bedding, listening to the faint sounds of the night watch outside the walls, boots crunching softly on gravel, a distant cough, the quiet rustle of wind against the leather tents. Tomorrow will likely bring more marching, more training, more of the steady rhythm that defines life in the legion. But there's one aspect of Roman soldier life you haven't experienced yet, one that might be even harder than combat. Surviving the Roman army meant surviving the weather, the brutal cold, the relentless rain, and the long campaigns in places where the climate itself seemed determined to defeat you. Morning comes with the quiet cruelty of routine. You wake before the sun again, though wake suggests you were ever fully asleep. Your body feels like a sack of stones. Every muscle complains when you move. Your shoulders ache from the weight of the pack. Your feet are tender maps of blisters, some fresh, some half-healed. Still, the trumpet sounds. So you stand. A Roman soldier's life is built on repetition. The same drills, the same marches, the same endless practice with shield and sword until your arms feel like boiled noodles. Today is training day again, which is almost every day. You shuffle toward the practice field with the rest of the century, yawning quietly. The air is cool and slightly damp. Someone nearby mutters a prayer to Mars under their breath. Waiting for you in the training yard are wooden swords and heavy wicker shields. At first glance, they look harmless, almost toy-like. But then you lift one. Roman training weapons are deliberately heavier than real ones. The wooden sword, the rudis, can weigh twice as much as a real gladius. The practice shield is thicker and heavier than the shield you carry into battle. The logic is simple. Train with heavier gear so real combat feels easier. At the moment, however, it does not feel easier. It feels like lifting a tree. Your instructor, a scarred veteran who seems personally offended by the concept of comfort, orders everyone into formation. Strike! You step forward and stab the wooden post planted in the ground. Thump. Again! Thump. Again! Thump. Each soldier practices against a wooden stake called a pallus. This simple training device is one of the most important tools in Roman military training. The idea is to simulate an enemy body. You are not slashing wildly. Roman doctrine emphasizes stabbing. The short gladius is designed for quick thrusts between ribs, into the abdomen, or under the shield. Roman military writers like Vegetius later insisted that a thrust was deadlier than a slash. A stab might only need 2 inches of penetration to reach something important. Cheerful thought for breakfast. So you stab the wooden post again, and again, and again. After a while, your arms begin to tremble. But the instructor notices everything. When someone gets sloppy, he walks over and slams his vine staff against their shield. Again. The vine staff, by the way, is not symbolic. Roman centurions really carried them, and they absolutely used them to discipline soldiers. Historians still argue whether this harsh discipline was the key to Roman military success, or simply one piece of a larger system that included organization, engineering, and logistics. Either way, right now, It feels like the vine staff is the center of the universe. Training continues. Shield up, step forward, stab, step back, over and over. Eventually the drill changes. Now you practice formation movements. The Centurion barks commands while the entire century shifts positions like a giant machine. Forward, right, left, close ranks, open ranks. The Roman army's strength lies not in individual heroics, but in coordination. A legion is a moving puzzle of units, centuries, cohorts, maniples in earlier periods, all designed to maneuver smoothly together. Even small mistakes can break the formation, which means more shouting and more practice. Someone 2 ranks ahead of you steps slightly out of sync. The instructor's vine staff taps his helmet sharply. You silently thank the gods it wasn't yours. Training doesn't stop at sword drills. Soon the equipment changes again. You're handed a javelin, the pilum. This weapon looks simple, just a long spear with a thin metal shank and a pyramidal tip. But it's one of Rome's clever battlefield tools. The thin iron shaft is designed to bend after impact. If the pilum sticks into an enemy shield, the metal bends downward, making the shield awkward and heavy. Many enemies simply drop the shield rather than fight with it stuck there. Historians still argue whether the bending was an intentional design feature from the beginning or a fortunate side effect of the weapon's construction. Either way, you're about to throw several dozen of them. You line up with the others. The command comes. Throw. You run forward 2 steps and launch the pilum at a target downrange. Thunk. The throw feels satisfying until the instructor says, again. Another pilum is placed in your hand, and another, and another. Your shoulder begins to ache with every throw. By midday, your arm feels like it belongs to someone else. But the day still isn't over. Because Roman soldiers don't just train to fight, they train to build. Soon the practice yard transforms into a construction site. You're handed tools, shovels, pickaxes, baskets. Time to dig. Roman soldiers are basically part-time engineers. Every day on campaign they build fortified camps, roads, bridges, and defensive walls. The famous Roman marching camp isn't improvised. It follows a standardized blueprint. Ditches are dug first. Then an earthen rampart is built from the soil. Wooden stakes form a defensive wall. Gates are positioned in precise locations. Even after a long march, soldiers must build this entire fortification before resting. Which means digging becomes part of your daily training. You and your fellow recruits start carving a shallow trench in the practice field. The dirt is stubborn. Your back protests every shovelful. Yet the Centurion watches like a hawk. Because in real campaigns, the speed of camp construction could mean survival. A fortified camp keeps enemies from launching surprise attacks during the night. It also keeps the army organized. Roman camps are so consistent that archaeologists today can often identify them from aerial photos thousands of years later. Perfect rectangles carved into the landscape. From above, they look almost like stamped footprints of the Roman army across Europe. A quirky tidbit that circulates among soldiers claims that a legion once built a full camp in under 3 hours during a particularly urgent campaign. Whether that's true or just barracks exaggeration is still debated. But watching your century dig, you believe it might be possible. Eventually the trench reaches the required depth. You climb out slowly, arms trembling. Your hands are filthy. Your back aches. And your stomach is making noises that could scare wildlife. Lunch finally arrives. If you were hoping for something exciting, well, it's bread again. Bread, a little cheese, maybe olives, if the supply wagons are feeling generous. Sometimes soldiers receive wine diluted with water, which is considered safer to drink than untreated water alone. A mainstream historical fact, Roman soldiers were typically issued about 3 pounds of grain per day as part of their rations, which means you spend a lot of time turning wheat into food, grinding it, cooking it, eating it, dreaming about different ways to prepare it. Some soldiers even carry small hand mills to grind grain themselves during campaigns. You chew slowly, staring at the practice field, the wooden posts, the trenches, the racks of training weapons. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again, and the day after that, and the day after that, because a Roman soldier isn't made in a single battle. He's made in thousands of repetitive drills, thousands of shovel strikes, thousands of practice stabs against a wooden post. The result, eventually, is one of the most disciplined fighting forces the ancient world ever saw. But right now, you're just tired, and you still have several more days of this week to survive. Your shoulders slump slightly as the trumpet sounds again. Afternoon drills are about to begin. Fantastic. Afternoon drills begin before your stomach has fully decided what to do with lunch. The trumpet calls everyone back to the training field, and you rise from the dusty ground with the enthusiasm of a man volunteering for a root canal. Your legs feel stiff. Your shoulders still ache from the pilum throws earlier. The bread sits in your belly like a polite but heavy brick. But Rome did not conquer half the known world by scheduling long naps. So here you are again. The instructors have changed the setup of the field while you were eating. Wooden barriers now form narrow corridors. Stakes jut out from the ground at awkward angles. Shields lean against racks. It looks less like a training yard and more like a strange obstacle course designed by someone who dislikes soldiers on a personal level. Your centurion strides down the line, vine staff tucked under his arm. "Formation drills," he announces. Groans ripple quietly through the ranks. Formation work might be the most mentally exhausting part of training. Fighting one opponent is simple enough in theory, though still terrifying in practice. But fighting as a coordinated wall of dozens of men requires constant attention. You raise your shield. The scutum is tall and curved, designed to cover most of your body. When dozens of them line up edge to edge, they form a moving barrier of wood, leather, and iron. You're ordered forward. Step, step, step. The shields overlap slightly, creating a protective wall. Your job is to stay aligned with the man beside you. Too far forward and you break the line. Too far back and you create a gap. Your eyes keep flicking sideways, making sure your shield edge touches the next one. Historians still argue whether Roman formations were as perfectly uniform in battle as later writers like to describe. Ancient historians often admired Roman discipline and might have exaggerated how flawless their formations appeared. But even if reality was messier, the training aims for perfection. The instructor calls out another command. "Testudo!" Immediately the front ranks raise shields forward, while the ranks behind lift theirs overhead. Suddenly you're standing inside what feels like a wooden turtle shell. This formation, the famous testudo, or tortoise, creates a protective roof of shields that can deflect arrows, stones, and other unpleasant things raining down from above. From outside, the unit looks like a slow-moving armored box. From inside, it feels cramped and a little suffocating. Your shield presses against your neighbor's. Someone's elbow pokes your ribs. The air smells faintly of leather and sweat. But the structure works. Ancient accounts describe Roman soldiers using the testudo during sieges to approach walls, while enemy defenders hurled missiles down from above. A well-executed testudo could turn a rain of arrows into little more than an annoying tapping sound. Of course, if someone in the formation panics and drops their shield, well, let's just say the turtle suddenly becomes a lot less turtle-like. "Forward!" the centurion shouts. The entire block of soldiers begins to move slowly across the field. Step, step, step. You can't see much from inside the formation, so you rely on the rhythm of the men around you. It's strangely hypnotic, like being part of a giant breathing machine. Eventually, the order comes to break formation. Shields drop. Fresh air rushes in. You take a deep breath, like a man resurfacing after a long dive. Next comes sparring. Real swords are still off limits, of course. Training blades only, but they're heavy enough to remind you that war is not a graceful sport. Pairs of soldiers face each other. You square off against a recruit from the next contubernium. His nose is slightly crooked, probably from a previous learning experience. The instructor raises his staff. "Begin." You step forward, shield up, sword ready. Your opponent does the same. Clack. Wooden blades strike shields. You try a quick stab toward his midsection. He blocks with his shield and pushes back. You step aside, remembering the endless drills against the wooden post. Stab, not slash. Keep the shield high. Stay balanced. The sparring grows faster. Clack, thump, scrape. At one point, your opponent lunges a little too enthusiastically and nearly trips over his own foot. You both pause just long enough to share a brief grin. Training may be brutal, but there's still room for the occasional moment of human clumsiness. The instructor clears his throat loudly. You both immediately resume trying to defeat each other. Roman training manuals emphasized endurance as much as technique. The goal wasn't just skill, it was stamina. So the sparring continues far longer than anyone would prefer. By the time it ends, your arms feel like wet rope. But the day still has one final lesson waiting, because a Roman soldier must also know how to survive when things go wrong. The instructors bring out unfamiliar equipment, small packs, blankets, cooking tools. This part of training focuses on field survival. You're shown how to start a fire quickly, how to pitch a basic shelter, and how to cook simple rations using minimal tools. Roman soldiers often had to fend for themselves during campaigns. Supply lines could break. Weather could delay wagons. Knowing how to improvise a meal or build a shelter could mean the difference between comfort and misery, or occasionally between life and death. A quirky story circulates among the recruits about a legion that survived a brutal winter campaign by roasting acorns and mixing them into their bread flour. Historians debate whether soldiers truly relied on such desperate measures regularly, but Roman armies certainly had to adapt when supplies ran thin. Right now, however, you're mostly focused on not burning your fingers while learning to cook grain porridge over a small fire. The result looks edible. Probably. You take a cautious bite. It tastes like warm wheat and mild regret. But hunger improves almost anything. As the sun sinks lower, the drills finally wind down. The training field grows quiet. Your century gathers their equipment and begins the slow walk back toward the barracks. Every step reminds you of the day's work. Your shoulders ache. Your feet protest. Your arms feel like they've been replaced with sacks of sand. Yet something else has quietly happened too. The movements are starting to feel familiar. The shield fits your grip better. The sword thrust comes more naturally. The endless repetition is shaping you, little by little. This is exactly how the Roman army wants it. Not heroes, not flashy warriors. Just disciplined soldiers who know exactly what to do when the trumpet sounds. You glance back once at the training field. Tomorrow you'll be there again. Same drills, same shouts, same wooden post waiting patiently for another 1,000 practice stabs. And you suddenly realize something slightly terrifying. This exhausting routine, this is still the easy part. Because sooner or later, the legion marches to real war. The march begins before the sun has properly decided to wake up. You hear the trumpet while the sky is still that soft bluish color just before dawn. The kind of light that makes everything look slightly unreal, like the world is still stretching its limbs. Unfortunately, the legion is not allowed to stretch slowly. Orders ripple through the camp with practiced efficiency. Soldiers roll blankets, pack gear, tighten straps, and swallow the last mouthfuls of breakfast. Fires are stamped out. Tents vanish as quickly as they appeared. Within an hour, the entire camp looks as if it never existed. Roman armies are very good at disappearing. You shoulder your pack, and once again, you're reminded why veterans joke that the heaviest thing in the Roman Empire is a soldier's luggage. The full marching load, armor, shield, weapons, tools, rations, cooking gear, stakes for building camp walls can easily weigh 30 kilograms or more. Some estimates suggest it could reach closer to 40 kilograms depending on the campaign. And yes, you carry most of it yourself. Roman soldiers were sometimes nicknamed Marius's mules. The nickname comes from the reforms of the general Gaius Marius in the late 2nd century BCE, who reorganized the army and increased the amount of equipment soldiers carried personally. Historians still argue whether these reforms were as dramatic as ancient writers claimed, but the nickname stuck for a reason. You feel exactly like a mule. The column begins to move. Thousands of soldiers stretch across the road like a long metallic snake. Shields hang at your side. Pilums bounce slightly with each step. The rhythmic clink of armor becomes the soundtrack of the morning. Step, step, step. Roman armies marched constantly. A standard march could cover around 20 miles, roughly 30 kilometers, in a day under good conditions. A forced march could go even farther, and this isn't a casual countryside stroll. You're carrying half your life on your back. The road beneath your sandals is one of Rome's famous highways, straight, durable, and carefully engineered. A mainstream historical fact, the Roman road network eventually stretched over 400,000 kilometers across the empire. Not all of it was paved with stone, but even the simpler roads were designed for military movement. Armies could travel quickly, messages could spread efficiently, and supply wagons could follow behind. From a strategic perspective, these roads were like veins carrying the lifeblood of Roman power. From your perspective, they are long, very long. As the morning progresses, the sun climbs steadily. The air warms. Sweat begins to gather under your armor. You adjust the straps of your pack for the 10th time. The soldier beside you mutters something about how his shoulders are trying to file a formal complaint. You sympathize. Marching creates a strange rhythm of thoughts. At first, your mind focuses on the physical discomfort, the weight, the heat, the endless steps. But after a while, your thoughts start to wander. You think about home, you think about food, you think about how amazing a soft mattress would feel right now. Occasionally, the column halts for short breaks. Soldiers drop their packs with audible relief and gulp water from their flasks. Then the trumpet sounds again. Back up, back to marching. Roman discipline allows very little room for laziness. If someone slows down too much or falls out of formation, the centurion's vine staff has a way of reminding them about punctuality. Still, the legion tries to keep morale up. Songs sometimes drift along the column, marching chants, crude jokes, and half-remembered tunes about victories and taverns and attractive bakers' daughters back in Italy. One particularly ridiculous marching rhyme claims that Roman soldiers could defeat any enemy as long as they had enough bread and wine. You're not entirely convinced, but the rhythm helps keep everyone moving. Around midday, the army halts for a longer rest. You drop your pack with the grateful enthusiasm of a man abandoning a cursed artifact. Your shoulders feel instantly lighter. Lunch once again is simple. Bread, cheese, maybe dried meat if supplies are generous. You chew slowly while sitting beside the road, watching the endless column of soldiers stretching into the distance. It's an impressive sight. Historians estimate that a full Roman legion contained around 5,000 soldiers, not including support personnel, engineers, medics, and the countless camp followers who often trailed behind armies. Altogether, a marching Roman force could resemble a moving town. A very tired town. One quirky tidbit often mentioned in ancient accounts is that Roman soldiers sometimes used vinegar mixed with water as a refreshing drink called posca. It sounds unpleasant, but it actually helped preserve water and provided a slightly tangy boost during long marches. You try a sip. It tastes surprisingly acceptable. Not delicious, but acceptable. After lunch, the march resumes. The landscape slowly changes as the day progresses. Fields give way to forests. Hills rise in the distance. Occasionally, small villages appear along the road, their inhabitants pausing to watch the legion pass. Children stare wide-eyed at the shining armor. Farmers nod cautiously. Travelers step aside quickly. There's something awe-inspiring about thousands of disciplined soldiers moving together. Even people who dislike Roman rule often respect the sheer organization of its army. Still, not everyone welcomes the sight. You notice a group of locals watching from a hillside with guarded expressions. It's hard to know whether they see protectors or occupiers. Historians still argue whether Roman expansion was viewed primarily as liberation or domination in the provinces it conquered. For the people living there, the answer probably depended heavily on the tax collectors who followed behind the army. As afternoon drifts toward evening, fatigue settles deeper into your bones. Your feet hurt, your shoulders ache, the road never seems to end. Yet just when you begin wondering if you'll collapse before sunset, the trumpet signals the end of the day's march. The legion begins spreading out across a broad field, which would be wonderful news if the workday were actually over. But Roman soldiers know better, because now it's time to build another camp. Shovels appear, axes are distributed, surveyors begin marking the ground with practiced precision. The entire legion transforms into a construction crew. Again, you stare at the empty field and sigh quietly. In a few hours, this blank patch of earth will become a fortified Roman camp with ditches, ramparts, gates, streets, and orderly rows of tents. Tomorrow morning, it will vanish again. This is the rhythm of Roman warfare. March, build, sleep, repeat. You pick up your shovel, glance at the fading sun, and wonder if the gods might consider inventing a profession slightly less exhausting. But until then, you dig. By the time darkness settles over the freshly built camp, your body feels like it belongs to someone else. The ditches are dug. The earthen rampart stands shoulder high in a neat rectangle around the camp. Wooden stakes line the top like a forest of sharpened teeth. Inside the walls, rows of tents stretch along straight dirt streets that intersect at precise angles. It's strangely impressive how quickly it all came together. A few hours ago, this was just an empty field. Now it's a miniature fortified town. Roman camps followed a predictable layout. The main roads crossing in the center, the command tent near the middle, units arranged in their assigned positions. The design made it easy for soldiers to find their places even in unfamiliar territory. Historians still argue whether every single camp followed this blueprint perfectly, but archaeological remains across Europe show strikingly similar layouts. Rome loved order, and right now, order means you finally get to sit down. Your contubernium, the group of 8 soldiers you live and fight beside, gathers around a small cooking fire. The tent behind you is simple but functional, barely large enough for everyone to sleep without accidentally elbowing someone in the ribs. Still, after a day like this, it might as well be a palace. One soldier grinds grain with a small hand mill, while another mixes the flour with water to form rough dough. Someone else slices a bit of salted pork into a pot. Dinner preparation is a team effort. Roman soldiers were expected to cook their own meals most of the time. Supply wagons provided the raw ingredients, but turning grain into bread or porridge was up to you. A mainstream historical fact: each contubernium often shared a mule to carry heavier equipment like the tent and extra tools, which is comforting because otherwise you'd probably be carrying the tent too. As the food cooks, conversation slowly returns. At first it's just tired grumbling, complaints about the march, jokes about the centurion's ability to smell laziness from 3 provinces away. Someone dramatically claims their feet have officially resigned from the army. You laugh quietly, feeling the tension of the day start to loosen. These men around you are strangers when you first arrive in the Legion. But shared exhaustion has a way of building friendships quickly. When you march, fight, and sleep beside the same 7 people every day, they become something close to family. Not always a polite family, but a reliable one. The pot finally begins to smell promising. Grain porridge thickened with bits of pork isn't exactly gourmet cuisine, but tonight it tastes magnificent. Hunger has that effect. You scoop a portion into a wooden bowl and eat slowly while the fire crackles. Around the camp, thousands of similar little fires flicker like a field of tiny stars. Beyond the walls, the countryside fades into darkness. Guards take their positions along the ramparts. Roman camps were never left unprotected at night. Sentries rotated through shifts to watch for enemy movement or surprise attacks. Because while the army sleeps, someone might be watching. A quiet breeze carries the scent of wood smoke across the camp. The sky above reveals a spread of stars bright enough to make city dwellers from the future jealous. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth of the fire ease your sore muscles. This might be the most peaceful moment of the entire day. Of course, peace in a Roman camp is rarely complete. Soon a familiar figure approaches, the centurion. Conversations drop instantly to quieter tones. He walks between the tents inspecting the evening routine, vine staff tapping lightly against his palm. Roman discipline does not end when the sun sets. Equipment must be maintained, armor cleaned, weapons checked. A dull sword or loose strap could become a deadly problem tomorrow. So after dinner, you spend time sharpening the edge of your gladius with a small whetstone. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The repetitive sound blends with the low murmur of conversations around you. One of the older soldiers begins telling a story. Apparently, during a campaign in Gaul, his legion once built a defensive wall so large it stretched for miles to trap an enemy force inside a valley. You blink. That sounds ridiculous, and yet it's true. A quirky historical tidbit. During the siege of Alesia in 52 BCE, Roman forces under Julius Caesar built an enormous double line of fortifications, one facing inward to trap the Gauls inside, and another facing outward to defend against reinforcements. Miles of ditches, walls, towers, and traps, all constructed by soldiers, which makes the trench you dug earlier today feel slightly less impressive. Still exhausting, though. The storyteller finishes his tale with exaggerated hand gestures and a dramatic whisper about hidden pits filled with sharpened stakes. Someone jokes that the real secret weapon of the Roman army is boredom. Historians sometimes debate whether Roman victories came more from battlefield brilliance or relentless organization. Listening to the steady rhythm of camp life, you begin to suspect organization deserves a lot of credit. The night grows deeper. One by one, soldiers crawl into their tents. Your contubernium finishes cleaning the cooking pot and stamping out the fire. The warmth fades quickly as the night air settles. Inside the tent, space is limited. 8 men, their gear, and a handful of personal items must somehow coexist in a space barely large enough for polite stretching. You arrange your blanket carefully and lie down. The ground beneath you is firm, not exactly comfortable. But after the day you've had, it doesn't matter. Outside, the distant footsteps of patrolling guards echo softly along the rampart. The camp slowly quiets. A few murmured conversations fade. Someone nearby snores with surprising enthusiasm. Your eyes grow heavier. Tomorrow will bring another march, another camp, another set of drills, another test of endurance. But for now, under the quiet Roman sky, you allow yourself a rare luxury. Rest. Morning arrives quietly, almost politely, as if the world itself understands that everyone inside this camp is extremely tired. You wake slowly, wrapped in the faint grey light of dawn filtering through the tent fabric. For a few peaceful seconds, you forget where you are. Then your back reminds you. Sleeping on the ground has a way of announcing itself first thing in the morning. Your shoulders feel stiff. Your legs protest slightly as you sit up. Somewhere nearby, a soldier yawns loudly enough to frighten birds. Outside, the camp is already stirring. Roman discipline does not allow for long, lazy mornings. You step out of the tent and breathe in the cool air. A thin layer of mist lingers above the nearby fields, glowing softly in the rising sunlight. Fires begin crackling again as soldiers prepare the simplest of breakfasts. Bread, of course. Bread is the loyal companion of every Roman soldier. Sometimes it's baked into rough loaves. Other times it's cooked flat on hot stones. Occasionally it becomes a thick porridge when mixed with water and boiled. However it appears, wheat is the backbone of the Roman military diet. A mainstream historical fact. Roman armies depended heavily on grain logistics. Without reliable supplies of wheat, large campaigns became nearly impossible. You chew your breakfast slowly while watching the camp come alive. Men check straps and armor. Someone sharpens a spear tip. A mule brays in the distance with the dramatic flair of a creature that has also had a long week. Your contubernium quietly prepares for the day's march, packing blankets and tools with the efficiency that comes from repetition. It's strange how quickly this routine has become normal. A week ago, everything about Roman military life felt overwhelming. The armor, the discipline, the endless drills. Now your hands move automatically through the motions. Strap the pack, check the gladius, adjust the shield. You're still exhausted, of course, but you're learning. Historians often note that the Roman army's greatest strength wasn't individual bravery. It was systematized training and routine. Anyone could become part of the machine, given enough time. Nearby, a group of soldiers is joking about the previous day's march. One of them insists that Roman roads were clearly designed by someone who hated feet. Another claims he could march twice as far if someone simply carried his pack. A third suggests that if the enemy saw how tired everyone was, they might feel too guilty to attack. The jokes ripple through the group with quiet laughter. Humor is one of the few luxuries soldiers can carry without adding weight to their packs. A centurion walks past, inspecting the morning preparations. His vine staff taps occasionally against shields or helmets as he checks for loose straps and poorly cleaned equipment. Even now, discipline continues. Historians still argue whether Roman military discipline was unusually harsh compared to other ancient armies, or simply better documented by Roman writers. But one thing is clear: it worked. Trumpets sound again across the camp, the signal to prepare for departure. Instantly, the relaxed morning mood tightens into organized movement. Tents are dismantled. Cooking fires are stamped out. Equipment is packed with practiced efficiency. Within a short time, the carefully constructed camp begins to vanish. The trenches remain, of course, and the rampart still stands. But the living heart of the camp disappears like mist under sunlight. Roman armies rarely linger. Your contubernium shoulders their packs once more. The familiar weight settles across your back. It's heavy. But somehow, it feels slightly less impossible than it did a few days ago. Perhaps your muscles are adapting, or perhaps your expectations have simply lowered. As the legion forms its marching column, you take one last look at the emptying camp. The rectangle of earth and dirt walls now sits quiet in the morning light. Soon, it will be just another abandoned footprint of the Roman army across the landscape. A quirky bit of history whispers through your mind. Archaeologists today still discover the outlines of ancient Roman camps from aerial photographs. Perfect rectangles etched faintly into fields where soldiers once slept 2,000 years ago. For the people who built them, those camps were temporary. For history, they became permanent scars on the earth. The column begins moving. Step, step, step. You fall into rhythm with the soldiers around you. The road stretches ahead once more, disappearing into the distant hills. This week has been long. Long marches, long drills, long nights inside crowded tents. And through it all, you've started to understand something about the Roman army. It isn't built from dramatic moments of heroism. It's built from repetition, from discipline, from ordinary soldiers who wake up tired and keep marching anyway. Would you survive a week as a Roman soldier? Maybe, but only if you're willing to embrace the routine, the sweat, the sore feet, the endless bread. As the legion marches onward, the sun climbs higher, warming the road and the armor on your shoulders. The sound of thousands of synchronized footsteps fills the air, and slowly, gently, the story of this week begins to fade into a quieter rhythm. The marching continues, but your thoughts drift further and further away from the noise of the road. The clink of armor softens, The voices of soldiers blur into distant murmurs. The landscape rolls by slowly, peacefully. You imagine the fields stretching endlessly beside the road, the breeze moving through tall grass, the quiet rustle of leaves in distant trees. Somewhere ahead, another camp will be built. Another fire will glow under the stars. But that's for tomorrow. For now, the road stretches on, steady and calm. Your footsteps match the gentle rhythm of the Legion. Step, step, step. And the world around you grows softer, slower, quieter. The sun warms your back. The sky opens wide above the marching column. And the steady movement of the road begins to feel almost like a lullaby. You keep walking. The sounds fade. The day drifts gently forward. And somewhere between one step and the next, sleep finally finds you. As the march fades into the distance, the world grows softer and quieter around you. The steady rhythm of footsteps becomes a distant echo, like waves brushing gently against a quiet shore. The weight of the armor, the long roads, the endless drills, all of it slowly dissolves into the background, leaving only the calm hush of night and the faint warmth of a campfire that has nearly burned down to glowing embers. Imagine the Roman camp now resting under a wide blanket of stars. The trenches lie silent. The wooden ramparts stand watch over sleeping soldiers. Inside the small tents, thousands of tired men breathe slowly and evenly, their long day finally finished. Somewhere a guard walks softly along the wall, his footsteps steady and patient. The breeze drifts across the quiet camp, carrying the scent of earth and fading smoke. Above, the stars shine with the same quiet light that watched these roads 2,000 years ago. And far beyond the camp, the Roman roads stretch endlessly through forests, hills, and distant provinces, silent now, waiting for tomorrow's march. But that's tomorrow. Tonight is for rest. The armor can wait. The drills can wait. Even the long road can wait. All that matters now is the gentle stillness settling over everything. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders grow lighter. And the ancient world fades into a peaceful, distant dream.